night, and I'll explain to you how to take infield and what it's for and so on and so forth. I said, because when you're looking at Little League, what you're looking at is a team that loses, who makes the most errors, is a team that loses. And if you want to win, you have to have a system. So the system is projected, and what we're looking at is, I'll teach you how to take infield practice so that you can identify the best infielders who will make your team presentable. It won't be throwing the ball all over the place. Then you can play anybody you want to play. So he said, oh, that's great. So every night we sat down for 2 weeks. And I went over everything. The second week I questioned him about, now what do you do here? What do you do there? So a couple of weeks went by, and he knocks on the door, and he comes in and he says, boy, he said, you really turned me around. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, you gave me a bunch of crap. He said, I don't know what's going on. He said, I just thought I'd have to come over and tell you just exactly what I think about you. I said, Bill, what's upsetting you? He said, you never told me that the right fielder has to come back and back up the catcher when the ball's hit into left field.
The right fielder back up the catcher?
He had been, one of the other coaches told him this is what he had to do.
It's a long way for a right fielder to run.
It's an impossibility.
I know.
But the fact remains that he didn't know what he was saying. And then I looked at him and said, how many fathers are Bill Radford?
Yeah.
The same way, the same thing could happen. Yeah. This guy up the street thinks that he's the greatest manager that ever walked on the field.
Yeah.
But
and he messed up his own kid.
He messed up his own kid. Well, how many other fathers have messed up their own kid? How many other fathers know that a 14-year-old doesn't get hand-eye coordination in some cases until they are 14? And if you never throw the ball to a child who never has the ball thrown to him, you roll the ball to them. Find out how they have hand-eye coordination. That's exercise 1 that we have of the 5 exercises. So I fleshed the exercises out to where I took them as it was my first time, and I was going to roll the ball. What was I looking for? I mean, and I never did that. I just figured to roll the ball, look who could pick it up, who couldn't pick it up, how fast did they pick it up.
Sure.
I automatically made a judgment. I gave them a 1, 2, 3, or 4. But if I didn't explain that to someone who didn't know how to make a judgment, I was the culprit, not the kid, or not the man.
Yeah.
It was my fault for not explaining it better.
That's true.
That's where you have to do it.
Yeah, no, I can do that.
So
I can do that.
The basic premise in the 5 areas that we have. This is for the kids who are 8, 9, and 10. Or 7, 8, and 9.
Just getting started.
Just getting started. We use what we call the S figure. We started them out in right field. We took them to center field, to left field, to third base, so that we formed the letter S. So that they never had to remember where the positions were. All I had to say to them is follow the kid in front of me.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah.
So that way they knew, then eventually after they played about a week or so, they picked up the positions.
And they knew where they were, sure.
Yes. And I had to teach them how to run the bases. This is base number 1. Say hello to base number 1, say hello to base number 2, and then we're right on the home plate. So we made it an introduction so that they would get used to going around the field. And we walked around the field. And that's what we did for the beginning of the season. And we played 2 games every night. We never kept score, but we played for an hour and a half. And that was the time limit, that was it. And then if a team would show up and have 2 or 3 people who were absent, we'd select from the other team. We had everybody graded because we must do it every single day. The most important thing is there has to be at least 1 coach at every spot with a chart that they can take and go ahead and evaluate every single workout and before every single game. And they worked out for 20 minutes, 10 minutes off, and then we start the game. It was a 1:30 deal, an hour and 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 20 minutes of workout, 10 minutes of rest, and an hour when they played. Now, we played what they call pitcher's poison. We call it pitcher's poison. The kids couldn't throw the ball across the infield. So we would have them throw the ball to the pitcher.
We called it pitcher's hand when I was growing up.
Good. And so we did that. And then we also had the discretion to where if a kid had hit the ball 3 times and never made a base hit, we would give him the right to go ahead and say, okay, he's safe. And give him a chance to run the bases. And that's how we organized.
Yeah.
So we started out with 80-some kids and we wound up with 96, I think. And when it was all over, because the kids started talking to each other how much fun they were having. I had one parent out of 96 kids come and thank me. One parent. And it was just a shock. And I figured if that's all you think about it, they'd come and they'd dump the kids off and go. You know, they didn't stay and watch. Some people did. The opening day, I told them that that baseball field was my office. I won't come into your office and raise Cain with you. I don't expect you to do that with me. If you don't appreciate what we're doing, I want you to applaud or keep your mouth shut. I don't want anyone ridiculing any of the children on the field or any of the coaches, because I've already worked it out with the police department that all I have to do is call you, the cops will come and I'll have you taken away and out of the ballpark. Because everything from here on is positive.
Yeah.
I said, now if you have any questions, I'll be happy to stay after the game and answer any of your questions. Which some of them did, of course some of them didn't. But the fact remains that it has to be organized and it has to be put into a way to where the man who's never played or never seen baseball can coach, or at least evaluate. By evaluation, you learn to put the proper one in the proper position. And then I went on to explain how, going ahead of it, and the kids, and going in high school, I explained that the high school coach, 9 chances out of 10 has never played because he's a friend of the principal. The principal gives him an extra $3,000 to coach baseball, and he goes and buys a book, and he becomes immediately the greatest umpire or greatest coach that ever lived, because he knows more than the kids.
In his own mind.
In his own mind. Yeah. But I found out over at New Bern, the kids who went into Little League, ironically, were smarter than the coach. And the coach took it out on them. I saw that in 2 places.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me at all.
So it was a shock to me, and because this is where I was down on the field. The other jobs that I did, I worked for George Myatt in Winter Garden, and George ran the whole camp. This was a professional camp. And up in Maine, I helped a friend, a neighbor, as a matter of fact, who came and asked me for some help. But I had nothing to do with all I did was give them the workouts. And I would be there to teach them how to evaluate, and that was it. And every place of the 5 places I happened to be, we all won the championship, just by making the proper selection. Nothing else.
No, I agree. Do you remember your first coach? The first guy who ever taught you how to play ball?
Yes.
Okay, was it your dad or was it?
No, it was Kenneth Simon there, who was an All-American football player, basketball player, and baseball player at Holy Cross.
And
he was the coach at my high school.
Okay, so you didn't play any ball before high school?
Oh yes, I played in the playground.
Oh, okay.
Philadelphia.
So you had actually learned a lot of the game just from other kids?
Yes, all of it.
Oh, okay.
Because that's what we played out in the street. We played stickball.
Yeah.
And we went down to the park and we would play down there. And we actually we had to pay 50 cents to get an organized team to play against us. So there was a bookie at that particular time who made the matches up. Wow. And I guess I was 12 when I first started.
So by the time you had a coach, you actually knew the game reasonably well.
I knew who was better than the other guy.
Yeah. Was there still anything that you needed to learn from a coach?
I have never played in a game. I've never seen a game anywhere. that I haven't learned something about baseball.
Okay.
I learned something that I didn't know anything about. And anybody who says they know everything about it is a liar. Pure and simple.
Did you, as a pitcher, did anybody teach you to throw a particular pitch?
No. The pitching coach that we had at Washington was a good pitcher, left-handed pitcher by the name of Altrock. And he was a comedian.
Nick Altrock.
Nick Altrock.
Oldest guy, but until Minoso did it, the oldest guy ever to play in a Major League Baseball
That's
game.
right. Hit one time.
He was 57 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's a great storyteller and everything like that, but he never talked about pitching. He had a balk move, which he picked off a lot of people, and he never, of course, we only had one or two left-handers, and he didn't bother with them, and he just do his comic act, and he'd sit on the bench. But he never stayed down. Benny Bengough, who was a second-string catcher with the Yankees, who was with some real good pitchers. Now, he would sit and talk about situations down in the bullpen, and that was the first time that I remember a person who talked about how to set the hitter up. And I was in the major leagues then, 3 or 4 years, I guess, or more. It took me, Mike, 8 years to learn how to relax, to where I had to convince myself that I didn't care. And as Mickey said to me just the other day, he said, Walter, he said, I can truly say, he said, I never saw you give up to a hitter. He said, in all the years we played together. He said, you were fighting somebody all the time. But I didn't learn how to relax until I convinced myself that I didn't care. It's as simple as I can possibly get it.
I mean, at least some of the things I've read say that the difference between a guy who makes it and a guy who doesn't is the ability to maintain his performance under pressure.
That's right.
And that there are a lot of people who can do well when there's no pressure.
That's right.
So, is that where the convince yourself you don't care fits into it? Or?
Yes, because if I don't care, I'm relaxed. I mean, I know I'm going to go home, and I know my wife is going to be there. I know the dinner's going to be there, and that satisfies me. Mm-hmm. Now, as far as being competitive, I think I don't know. I had a younger brother, and we fought every day, so it was competition every time I woke up. So I think I probably was a competitor from my standpoint right from the day I was born. I don't know. I don't know that people are born like that or whether they acquire it, or I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know.
I think that I would tend to think more of it's in the way you're raised. You know,
well, genetics and environment.
But that's just my opinion.
Sure.
Yeah.
Circumstances alter cases, but I think now all the sports except baseball are going to the mental problems and the mental questions that have to be asked of each individual. I think they finally begin to recognize that biomechanics have found out exactly what the things are that you must do and the things that you can overdo, but they haven't touched the mind.
No.
And some of the sports are making advances. Golf is doing a fantastic job. There are about 10 books that I know that I've read from psychologists who teach golf from a mental aspect. And it's a brand new ballgame. As I look at the evaluation, very few people can tell me. I've had major league managers come up to me and say, Walter, when do you take a player out, pitcher out? I mean, some of them have been managing in the major leagues for 4 or 5 years, and they don't know when to take a pitcher out. There is a specific reason when you take a pitcher out, and it's not a complicated process, but you have to have the advantage to sit there and watch to see how it comes about. There are certain times, when I was at Mason, the guy might make 2 pitches in the beginning of the inning, I'd go in and take him out. And said, Coach, why did you take me out? I said, well, you were finished. at that particular point. You were no longer pitching, you were throwing. And the difference is the difference between making a pitch and thinking a pitch and throwing it. Because a throw anybody can make. A pitch cannot be made without some type of thought. So the great pitchers are not the guys who are the strongest, as Greg Maddux will show you right now. To me, he's the greatest pitcher I have ever seen. I've never seen hitters walk up there with a blank look on their face half the time when this guy's pitching. Yeah. It's amazing what he does. And he's capable of throwing the ball hard.
Yeah, he's 43 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And still winning games.
Yeah. Yeah, he's won 14 or 15 games.
Yeah.
Last year.
So the ability to get to the basic concept of evaluation, and I put in the book what Webster had to say about it and how it would be used. And I felt as though that was the proper way to introduce the biomechanics of the things I learned at George Mason with the use of their library.
Mm-hmm.
People don't know that they're hooked into the Library of Congress. And there are all masterpieces, they're all doctoral theses in there from some of the brightest people in the world. And so that gave me an advantage.
Well, the mental, it's interesting with the mental part of it all, because I remember the first time I remember hearing about the mental part of it was, I guess, 1972 with Steve Blass. I remember when all of a sudden here was a guy who'd been one of the best pitchers in the National League. All of a sudden he couldn't throw strikes. And he didn't know why. He wasn't hurt. You know, he just couldn't throw strikes.
Greatest pitching coach I've ever heard. As a matter of fact, I called him probably 4 or 5 times every season, the 3 seasons I was at George Mason, was Johnny Saint.
I thought that's who, you know, he just died. Yeah.
He did?
Just recently.
He had Alzheimer's.
Yeah, just in the last month he died. He died. 89 years old. Yeah.
I had some great talks with him at George Mason. I ran across a baseball that he had doctored up. And I said, you know, this is interesting. So I called him, and he had just sold his automobile agency. And I talked to his wife. And she said, what? I told her, I said, I'm the baseball coach at George Mason. And I played against John. I said, and he has some very unusual ideas about pitching. I said, and I'd like to speak to him if I could. She said, I'll have him call you back. So I figured, well, that's the end of that. And believe it or not, in the next half hour, I was sitting in my office, and here comes Sam. So, and we talked, and I would ask him about how he felt. He would ask me how I felt about it. And then we came to a position to where we understood each other, to where we could advance our thinking to a point, well, would this go, you said this, you said this, you said that, would this work into what you said? He said, well, good, you maybe think about that, which I hadn't thought about before. And he gave me back the same thing. I didn't know that the position of the arm, of the forearm, had to be exercised at age 8, 9, and 10 in order to be able to be used at age 18 and 19.
Okay.
And he showed me the principle. Now you got to remember, he was a curveball pitcher. 90% of his pitches were breaking balls. And I'll lead you to another situation. I'm riding with Williams and into the ballpark one day, and I said, you know, I said, every good hitter that I've ever seen has had a very level stroke. I said, now what are you doing talking about uppercutting? I said, because uppercutters cannot hit the ball.
No,
I said, it's a guess. He said, I'm not going to tell you. So I got to thinking about it, and about a week later, I said, I finally figured it out. He said, what do you mean? I said, you're uppercutting the breaking balls, and you're guessing breaking ball. He says, it's easier to hit something that's horizontal than it is not. So,
yeah.
And that's all he said. He never told me that I was right or wrong.
No.
He said the vertical pitch has to be uppercutted. So I took that from the best hitter that I've ever seen, that things were different. So then when I was talking to John about it, I asked him, I said, is that the reason why? He said, better yet, he said, why don't you go ask 2 or 3 guys, so-and-so, Woods and what's his name, Whitey Ford. And first thing you start, I said, wait a minute, when did you work with Ford? He said, I was there with the Yankees for 2 years, and with Detroit 2 years, with Chicago 2 years. Then I went back and looked at the records of these guys that he's talking about. Here's 8 guys in the Hall of Fame who have been taught by Johnny Saint, who were average pitchers.
And all got better after. Yeah.
Joe Coleman's boy was an 8-game winner. He got traded to Detroit. Who was the pitching coach?
He won 20 one year, didn't he?
140 games he wins. I mean, you know, there has to be something to what he was doing with them. And then he said, you know, I was not the most popular guy in the manager's seat. I said, well, what did you feel like? Why did you feel like the manager didn't like you? He said, because I didn't spend much time with him. He said, except to defend the pitchers. He said, I argued with him about what he was doing with the pitchers that he should have been doing. He said, so it was a fight all the time. He said, but I never gave a kid any one thing to do to make him better. He said, I don't agree with that philosophy. And I said, well, I don't either. I said, I never talked to anyone to say, this is how I did it. He said, that's as good a description as you can give. I said, then what do you do? He said, I study each individual movement. He said, and as long as his arm is in control, under control, he said, the elbow will be on the same plane as the shoulders. And I said, yes, I agree with that. I said, but what do you do with everything below? He said, let it happen. I said, the guys in the Fiji Islands, when they're throwing spears at the coconut that's up on top of the tree, throw underhand. He said, because that's the way their arm moves when they walk. He said, and the further you get away from that, he said, how long do overhand pitchers, straight overhand pitchers last in the major leagues? I said, 3 or 4 years. He said, 5 at max. He said, because they tear up their shoulder or their elbow because they're not on the plane of the shoulder.
A natural movement. A
natural one. So I wanted to include that into part of the evaluation. So basically, I'll think of other things, I guess, from time to time if I go back and refresh myself with this.
If a father has a son that he's thinking of, maybe he'd like to play baseball, or what's the first thing that you'd look for as far as abilities?
Well,
and we're talking about little boys now, 7, 8 years old.
It happens in all baseball. It doesn't make any difference if you're 8 or 9 or whether you're 29. Right. There's one thing that you utilize in a series of percentages. The thing is broken down into what I call 50, 25, and 25. What is 50 in the evaluation of what do you need? What do you have to have? Part of your equation. What would 50% mean to you that every player would have to have?
Hand-eye coordination would be something important to me.
See, that's a logical question, a logical answer. The answer is speed because it's the only thing that's used on both sides.
Okay.
Offensively
and it's just about one of the only things that can't be taught either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I tried that with the track team at George Mason. I had Bucky Weaver, who was a Major League Baseball player who couldn't run. Yeah. Now I realize that they have kids who can't run but can do other things and make up for it because the players are not playing defensively like they did when we played.
And speed never goes into a slump. Yeah.
There you go. So now...
All right, that's the 50.
Yeah, 25% is how do you feel the ball, 25% is how do you make contact with the bat.
Okay.
So you're talking about 25, 25.
So you weren't talking about more specific things like hand-eye and all that. But although...
It all enters into it.
Yeah, it all enters into it.
So it depends on your speed of your hands. Ted Williams said the most huge forearms I've ever seen in my life. And he would do 100 push-ups on his fingertips every time when he walked in the clubhouse. And when he got halfway in his uniform, he'd get down on the floor and do 100 push-ups on his fingertips, just as fast as you could count. But he said hand was his movement was all with his hands, but he also looked at the pitcher as having a box on his shoulder. And his hand would come out of the box at a certain place. So therefore, if you're going into an advanced situation, you have to have a major league pitcher has to be able to throw the ball every pitch from the same direction, and be able to change the direction of the arm with all the 4 or 5 pitches, whichever he has.
So that he's not chipping his pitch.
So that's exactly where most kids come in. They throw the fastball from a 3/4 position or higher, and the curveball from down below. It's almost a flat slider.
Which tips everything. Yeah.
Right. But if you go back to Sane said, if you karate chop with your forearm, that's the breaking ball. If you slap with the forearm in the hand, that's a fastball. There are pitchers who work on top of the ball. There are pitchers who pitch in back of the ball. The guys who last for 20 years are the pitchers who pitch in back of the ball, because they use the big muscles of their body. That's where the power is. The
Instead
power
of
is
doing everything with the...
exactly.
Yeah.
The power is below. And when I asked John, I said, John, when you are cutting, he said, karate. He said, just think of karate. I said, when you're cutting, he said, what they make a mistake, where they make a mistake, they try to teach a kid in high school how to throw a slider and a curveball. He said, but they don't condition their arms for the position. He said, and they hurt their arms and quit. And I think that's probably as true as you can get, because the muscles have to be developed. And when I was pitching coach with Texas, I had one kid broke his arm, and it was my fault, actually. He was a first baseman who couldn't hit that well, left-handed first baseman. He was about 6'3", went about 215, and I tried to convert him into a pitcher down in Greenville.
Who was it?
Momi, his name was.
Okay.
M-O-H-M-E.
Okay.
And so I taught him how to release, where his arm had to be and where his feet were, so that he wouldn't put any abuse on his arm, because when pitchers who haven't pitched get tired, their front foot starts to cross over their back foot, and it takes all the pressure off of their shoulder and their elbow. So when you see a guy who's stepping over, what I call stepping over the line, then at that particular time I know he's got a bad arm. He's hurt.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I taught him all this, but it puts a lot of pressure on the rest of his body. He pitched the first 5 games and nobody got a run off of him with Greenville, South Carolina. And he was striking out anywhere from 18 to 20.